It's the age of the InfoWars. I don't mean a show by Alex Jones. I mean, what you'll find is you'll get lots of random comments on videos saying, oh, I've listened to this and it's fantastic, and oh, you got to try it. And you'll find the same people coming on with the same comments on multiple videos. And what's happening is they're working for the companies, obviously, and they're pushing the name. They know people will go in the comments and read it, and they're pushing names of speakers. And oh, you got to try this. It's fantastic. You know, a lot of it is absolute rubbish. However, one of the names that keeps coming up, the Bogasing. I've got no idea how you're meant to pronounce it. It's not the catchiest of names. Maybe in China, where it's made, that actually means something really, really funny. I don't know. But in the real world, Bogasing, it's not a speaker name that's going to really catch my attention. But it's called Bogasing. It's the M4. And on paper, 40 watts. That little speaker apparently is 40 watts. They didn't say RMS. It's probably peak. Well, it's going to be, we know it's peak. We're not going to take these headline figures seriously, but they're saying 40 watts, powerful Bluetooth speaker, crystal clear stereo sound with punching deep bass, is delivered with exceptional clarity and zero distortion. Have you ever had a speaker that's been measured as zero distortion? No, of course not, you haven't. And it's by the best audio components. Well, and this is the sad thing, you can say whatever you want online now. Someone will believe it. The mattress world, which is where I started, is awful for that. Speaker world is no different. Gonna need channels like, what's his name? Oh, Alan Ross Reviews, because he gives it to you straight. They say you'll feel as though you're at a live concert. That little speaker apparently is going to make me feel like I'm at a live concert. They say it's got a durable silicone case, and I agree with them. It has got what feels like a durable silicone case, and it also says it's got tri-bass EQ. So let's have a look at the speaker itself. So we've got the power on and off. We've got M. M is the modes, because I know you guys love it, actually. Well, it took me by surprise at first, but now I've got to know you guys better. You love an auxiliary input. Woo! We've got an auxiliary input. We've got USB-C charging, but even better, we've got a TF slot. We've got a flash card slot. You can play music right off the device itself. That's become something you clearly really, really like. You can use this as a phone speaker. You've got a dedicated mic button. We've got volume up and volume down, and we've got player controls, play and pause. The mode button switches between the auxiliary, Bluetooth, and the TF slot. And we've got that EQ button. So default mode will be with just a blue light with no colours on at all. If I go to the white light, that's the vocal mode, and that's the second mode that comes on. And then the third mode, which they call super bass. That's going to be incredible bass, and that's the green light. So the first question, of course, I'm asking myself when I turn this speaker on is, okay, what do all these modes do? And what's the actual, how does the frequency response measure?
Default mode, also known as 3D mode, quite linear in its volume steps. Of note is how bright it is, and there is more bass at lower volumes than at high volumes. If you look at the high end relative to the bass, by the time you hit maximum volume, pretty bass light in relative terms, but at all volumes it certainly is on the bright side with a dip in the mids. So-called super bass mode actually is a bit more balanced. They call it bass mode. If you look carefully, it's got a little bit less deep bass than default mode, but a little bit more in the upper bass. So it's a bit weird calling it super bass mode, but it certainly is looking a bit more balanced, but it does share that big 10 kilohertz peak, and it seems to hold on to more bass relatively to the highs as it goes through the volume steps. So-called a vocal EQ mode. It's almost the default mode, but with even less bass. So super bright mode, really. So
vocal mode. Why? I don't know why they call it vocal mode. That certainly doesn't measure. They've just made it super bright. It's got nothing to do with where your actual vocals are. That's really, really weird. So-called super bass. More bass is actually less bass, but a more balanced sound. And default mode seems quite V-shaped and very, very bright. I'm going to dispense with vocal mode straight off the bat. And I'm going to do a little test. Low volume and higher volume. Default, which is what they call 3D mode. They actually call it a 360 degree mode. Come on, it's all on axis. But however, they're saying it's a 3D mode against the bass heavy mode that looks like a balance mode. They're calling it super bass. low volume, high volume comparison. So just to quickly, they called it 3D. Oh, it's 360 degrees. Well, the only driver on the back is the passive radiator. If you hold this up to the light, and I don't think you're going to actually see that, there appears to be another driver in the middle, or the full range drivers either side of that. But there is no driver in the middle. That's just something they shaped from a bit of metal underneath that. I don't know why, but that's if they're actually trying to make that look like a driver, that's a fake driver in the middle. We don't like to see fake stuff, but you know what matters is how it sounds in the real world. You've had to listen, low volume, high volume. For my money, you do have more bass kick in 3D mode at lower volumes, and you do have more high-end fizz, but that's because it's more V-shaped. But that works at full low volumes. In terms of the higher volumes, that high end now becomes a problem at volumes where your ears are more sensitive to the high end and you're looking for more balance. That sounds off. I don't like that so-called default 3D mode. It's not a 3D mode. It's just a V-shaped bright mode at higher volumes. And the biggest problem is the suck out between 300 and 2 kilohertz. That makes it sound a bit weird. But hey ho, when it's in so-called super bass mode, I call it Alan Ross balance mode, sounds really, really nice, surprisingly nice. In fact, it sounds so nice, given this is going to cost you about 50 quid. Don't forget, so far my 50 quid pound for pound champion has been the Soundcore Boost upgraded version, which overtook the Max Sound Plus. And this is a lot bigger. But I got this for around 50 quid. I did have to buy it from America. I did have to pay in dollars, but equivalents in UK terms, 50 quid. I have to say, to my ears, I'm thinking that sounds like a contender. If size isn't the issue, at around the £50 level. So I wanted to see how far I can push it. You may think this is a really, really unfair test, but I'm going to compare it to a £160 JBL Charge 5, because that is 40 watts, and they're claiming 40 watts. And of course, our former pound for pound world champion, but still a sweet spot around 80 quid if you want a refined, more hi-fi, more high-end listen, but you can do without deep bass. So I'm doing this sort of volumes that I listen to around the 70-75% volume. For my money, it's still the super bass mode is the mode to listen to at those volumes, but I'm going to give you both modes as a comparison. So let's start off against the JBL £160 Charge 5.
I don't wanna say anything, cause if I do I might say the wrong words. Oh no. So I'll keep my mouth shut and not listen. Afraid I'd lose you if I didn't. Till we find what we're missing and compromise. So I'll keep my shoes on and not leaving. We're on thin ice, winter season. Can we find a single reason not to say goodbye? Oh, if I said what's on my mind, would you stay with me tonight? If I said what's on my mind, would that make you run and hide? Run and hide. Run and hide. If I said what's on my mind, would that make you run and hide? Would that make you run and hide? Run and hide. Run and hide. Oh, would that make you run and hide? Don't know what to do anymore. I'm out of options, nothing's working. I'm out of service. Come help me now, I'm fucking nervous. I'm trying but can't scratch the surface. So I'll keep my mouth shut and not listen. Afraid I'd lose you if I didn't. Can we find what we're missing and compromise? So I'll keep my shoes on and not leaving. We're on thin ice, winter season. Can we find a single reason not to say goodbye? Oh, if I said what's on my mind, would you stay with me tonight? If I said what's on my mind, would that make you run and hide? Run and hide. Run and hide. If I said what's on my mind, would that make you run and hide? Would that make you run and hide?
I have to say, £160, about 50 quid. 3 of those is one of those. And you can get a pair of those and put them in stereo. Still cheaper than a single channel. It's doing the job for me. I think it sounds really nice. It's not the greatest sound in the world, not pure hi-fi, but I'm not missing it. When I listen in super bass mode, which to me is Alan Ross balance mode, there's nothing I'm really missing. For 50 quid, the size of that speaker, I think it's doing a surprisingly, really, really nice job. In fact, even at these volumes, it's got a bit more in terms of deep bass over the JBL Charge 5, if indeed you leave it in default mode. Bear in mind, when you push the M4 in default mode above 50% and higher, the bass can get really out of control, along with a quite edgy now high end. An out of control bass and a very woolly bass in default mode 3D as you go up the volume scale. And it's got a whole dollop of more upper bass. I mean, that's the thing between super bass mode and the so-called default mode, 3D mode. It's more upper bass dominated in super bass mode. There is a little bit more deep bass in default mode, 3D mode. The problem is it's got such a boost on the high end that, to my ears, if your ears are adjusted to a lot of speakers, it really sounds off and horrible in 3D mode, whereas it cuts through, at lower volume, it cuts through a lot of tracks, and that does fine. At these volumes, for me, real world volumes, the balance mode is what they call super bass mode. It's a shame that you have to keep going to EQ mode. It's not even the first EQ mode. For default, then vocal, and then super bass mode. Not a lot of thoughts gone into usability there. At these volumes, it's a bit mids dominated now, the JBL Charge 5. I like this at lower volumes. I know a lot of you like it at all volumes, and that's great. It is a decent enough speaker. It's still a mono speaker. And the difference in the mono from the JBL Charge 5 and the stereo that you're getting from the Bogasing, such a catchy name, M4, is obvious. There is obvious stereo there. I'm not saying it's a great soundstage or anything, but the difference between mono and stereo is obvious. And in default mode, the fact that it's dominated, even though there's more deep bass, it's dominated by the highs, and that's obvious. So I have to say, at these real-world listening volumes, I'm preferring the Bogasing M4. is a shock to me. Didn't expect much because I'm used to all these comments about this speaker is the greatest. All these low-cost speakers, they're fantastic. You got to listen to, mate. It's not often that it proves to be the case where it actually is a genuinely decent sounding speaker, and a surprise. 50 quid sounds really nice. So what about, we already said that was my preference at moderate to low volumes. At high volumes, this has been my preference for kind of this sort of size, but it's half the price, 80 quid. It's half the price of the JBL Charge 5. So the Bogasing M4, a bit of a shock speaker in my personal world, against my former pound for pound world champion, Soundcore Motion Plus. Bear in mind, I've EQ'd Motion Plus to sound smooth and for the bass to dominate a bit more. Having got used to the Motion Boom, it's hard to listen to a speaker now that doesn't have that decent lower bass. That's why it's got a very smooth EQ now on the Motion Plus. To all of those of you who are still saying, leave them in default mode, otherwise it's completely pointless. The clue is Alan Ross reviews, Alan Ross opinion, Alan Ross, the way he listens to his speakers. So that's how I listen to that speaker now. It's quite smooth. I have pushed that 1 kilohertz slightly up from how I used to have it, so there's a little bit more fizz, but I need to have that bass dominating. But I've got to say, the Bogasing M4 in its super bass mode, it's a close run thing. In its balance mode, super bass mode, it's a little bit brighter. Obviously, you can EQ this a million different ways. I'm saying the way I've EQ'd it and the way I listen to it, which I prefer on the Motion Plus, equivalence, it sounds a bit brighter, but a bit thinner in the bass. I have tuned this to get the most out of the bass. This is looking fantastic value now at the 50 quid level. I'm going to have to do a head-to-head with the Soundcore Boost to decide if I had 50 quid, $50, who would I rather spend it on? Well, $60, who would I rather spend it on? Got to bear in mind, this is bigger than the speakers I've been looking at that price level. But in terms of sheer price, that's sounding absolute fantastic value. I don't like default mode when you go to 50% and above, but it's going to be a matter of taste. It's way too bright for me, and the vocal and the high end sounds off anyway. But at lower volumes, I prefer default mode. At higher volumes, I'm preferring the super bass mode, which is actually the balance mode. The real question is, all right, what happens at max? How much headroom is there? Not that I would expect much. I'm already happy with that without hearing it at maximum volume. But if we go to maximum volume, what is the headroom on all of these speakers?
So ultimately, Motion Plus has way more headroom. It goes the loudest, has the loudest peak, has the most in terms of deep bass. 2 dB behind is the JBL Charge 5, which is actually on a par with the Bogasing M4 in its default mode, although there's a bigger peak on the JBL Charge 5, and the M4 actually has about the same level at 50 Hz in terms of bass, but overall more bass on the JBL Charge 5. Bringing up the rear, it doesn't go particularly loud in its most balanced mode, which they call super bass mode. So ultimately, if you want the most volume, you will have to leave it in default mode, so-called 3D mode. But way out in front in terms of volume, Motion Plus, in terms of total bass, it's 4 dB up on the JBL Charge 5, 6 dB up on the Bogasing M4 in its default mode.
So at the end of the day, when you're spending the money, that's what you're paying for, more headroom. So if you're going to go really loud, it runs out of gas. Okay, if you leave it in default mode, it can go head to head in terms of sheer LUFS with the JBL Charge 5, but it still loses out in terms of the bass. There isn't the headroom, the volume there in super bass mode. Got massive amounts of headroom on the Motion Plus, which is the clear winner for me at these volumes. And then just behind the Motion Plus is the JBL Charge 5, which I already said for me is more about moderate to low volumes, but does fine if it's the only speaker you have at higher volumes. So there's the difference. 160 quid, about 50 quid, about 80 quid. It's about how loud you want to play it. But I have to say, fantastic value. Before I declare it my £50 winner, I have to take into consideration its size. It's bigger than the speakers I've been looking at 50 quid. But in terms of sheer money terms, probably going to be their failure. I don't know. I haven't listened head-to-head yet with the Soundcore Boost or its former champion, the Tribute Max Sound Plus. I will do that in another video. But even against the Motion Plus, it has a place. When you listen in balance, if you take into account, you may or may not have to keep resyncing every time you turn it on, hitting the plus button. But we do have USB-C, we do have a TF flash card slot, we do have auxiliary input. It ticks a lot of boxes. What else does it tick in terms of its specs? It is indeed IPX7. You can drop it into water, and actually, not only can you drop this into water, if you drop it into a pool into the sea, it will float, and depending on what angle you drop it in, it can float drivers up and still happily play music. Again, win-win. That's not something I see very often. You know, a lot of these speakers IPX7, but they drop to the bottom. So they're rated up to 1 meter, 30 minutes. But if you drop it into, say, a 5 meter pool, 25 feet is a bit much, but it will sink to the bottom anyway. So you need something that floats. That will float, and it will float with drivers up. Even less number of speakers will float drivers up. So again, fantastic that at this price level, I can drop it into a pool and play it. I can be on me Lilo and that next to me. It will play drivers up. And in terms of all the specs, yes, you know, I don't have to tell you, it's made in China. China make 99% of speakers that we come across now. But 50 quid, I've already said 50 quid. About 3 of those is one of those, and you can get almost 2 of those, play them in stereo against one Motion Plus. That's why this speaker has taken my world by storm at this point. It's great to have a speaker that isn't called Soundcore, and you can't accuse me of working for Soundcore. That is truly good value. That is truly good value. The battery is up to scratch because that's 24.4 watt hours versus 25 watt hours, 27 watt hours. So all about the same in capacity. Yes, SBC versus aptX, but depending on the quality of the tracks you're playing, may or may not make a difference. All Bluetooth 5, all do stereo pairing, all have USB-C. The JBL Charge doesn't even have an auxiliary input. Again, gives you an auxiliary input. One of the negatives is, it's a downer, I'm not going to buy it because can't use it as a power bank. Well, I don't know how many people really use their phone, their speakers to charge their phone. There was a time when that was one of the headline features, you can charge your phone. If that's something you do often with a speaker to charge your phone, you won't be able to do that with the handily named Bogasing M4. It weighs just 731 grams. It's still a travel speaker. 731 grams versus over a kilo, just over a kilo for the Motion Plus, 980 grams. So about a kilo, 730 grams. In terms of weight, it kicks ass. And it doesn't have tweeters, whereas both of these speakers, tweeters, that has 1 tweeter, that has 2 tweeters. But hey-ho, it's really, really nice to be able to say, it doesn't happen very often, to say, I found a speaker better than other speakers I've been recommending to you. It's at the 50 quid level. Although at the moment in the UK, it doesn't seem to be you can buy it. I got it quite easily from Amazon.com. In the US, $60, 50 quid. And I really have stonking value. That's a great listen to my ears. Your taste is different. You may want massive dollops of bass. You've been listening to the JBL Boombox 2. I know you keep, well, why don't you review the JBL Boombox 2? Because until I don't care about neighbours or until I've got 500 quid or 400 quid these speakers are costing to throw away, you know, I'm just not a big enough channel to be able to afford to do that. And bear in mind, none of these companies support me. My takeaway is I'm pleased to be able to announce a cheap speaker that is generally quite nice to listen to without any trade-offs. I can happily listen to that and not think, oh, it's missing the mids, the highs, but I like it. Super bass mode, above 50%. Default mode, below 50%. You're laughing. Hope you got something out of this video. Thank you for watching.
I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't no project wife, got my logic right, guess I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. I ain't about that. I ain't about that life.